Okay, hello everybody. We are at the Environmental Sciences and Studies Zoom Employer Session, and we are very excited to welcome June Fichter, who is from the Lake Sunapee Protective Association. First, I do want to introduce myself though. I'm Noelle Bassey, and I'm the Internship and Study Abroad Coordinator here at the Harrington Center. I work with Jen, and in addition to helping you with internships and study abroad, we also try to help you with anything that's career related. And some of these sessions are specifically geared towards kind of, giving you ideas, letting you know about the field and tricks and tips on getting a job. And just, there's more than just lab work in the environmental and biological fields. So I'd like to welcome June Fichter from the Lake Sunapee Protective Association. And I'd like to also tell you a little bit about her as well. As the executive director, June leads the organization in fulfilling its environmental vision, as well as its management and operation. LSPA is committed to environmental stewardship, solving environmental issues, and promoting its mission to preserve the Lake Sunapee region. June leads staff in environmental education, both in regional school systems and for the public. She collaborates with municipalities, the state of New Hampshire, other nonprofits, and individuals in watershed conservation. She also joins with scientific researchers in furthering limnological and ecosystem projects, as well as being responsible for staff at the LSPA Water Quality Lab, a certified NHDES lab serving 25 lakes and ponds. LSPA is also responsible for regional GIS mapping, watershed and water source analysis, as well as aquatic invasive species detection and control. June holds an MS and a BS from the School of Engineering at Northeastern University, as well as an MBA from the McKim School of Business at Northeastern. So please welcome June Fichter.
Well, thank you.
Oh, we can see you now.
You can
Excellent.
See me. I fixed it. Yeah, it's terrible giving a presentation, it's like a phantom or something. So,
no, it's great to
thank
see
you. Thank you so much for coming. And it's a delight to be here. And I guess I'll start off by simply telling you a little bit about what LSPA does. And for that, I have a short PowerPoint. Pictures just say so much more than words. So we'll go through that. And then toward the end of that, I have a couple of more thought-provoking slides having to do with examples of career paths. And I took our own staff as examples. It zigzags. There's no straight path. And, you'd be amazed that, and I don't know whether you're sophomores, freshmen, seniors, but, it's a big deal getting your first job or deciding to go on to graduate school and then what, and then what. And it all zigzags. And it's environmental studies, environmental segment of the market, we'll say, is so huge. So we can talk about that. So why don't we start the slideshow and we'll run through that. So Noelle's going to share the screen. And so LSPA, first of all, is kind of it's not a large organization. We have 7 employees year round, and then some interns and a few others. If we could just stay on page 1 for a moment. If we can back up. Whoops. Well, that's okay. That first slide was simply our buoy. LSPA is an old organization, 1898. So it's been around for a while. 1898, the environmental movement, let's say, was just beginning to arrive with Teddy Roosevelt and the national parks, and here in New Hampshire, the White Mountains. And people were beginning to be concerned about their water resources. And Lake Sunapee had people who were very concerned, so they started the Lake Sunapee Protective Association. We've shortened it to LSPA. But at that time, the environmental problems were logging. They were clear cutting for the sheep craze in the mid 1800s, late 1800s. And people's habits, for example, they had privies near the water, thinking that was a convenient thing. And of course, people were starting to realize all of that wasn't so great. But anyway, moving fast forward to today, we do environmental education. We collaborate with researchers. We support science. We're not scientists ourselves, but you're looking at our instrumented buoy, which takes measurements 24/7 every 10 minutes. That data is electronically sent to the world, literally. And then we collaborate with the state, with towns, with EPA, and so on and so forth. Next slide. Relative to environmental education, we do a lot of things. We work with the local school systems, the Kearsarge system, Newport, Sunapee, homeschoolers. We get requests from other schools to come visit us, and we have all kinds of programs. Watershed Discovery Day is hosted at Mount Sunapee, and so they learn how to make filters. They learn in the lower right, they're actually competing. They're in teams and they're competing for limited water. On the lower left, they're looking at macroinvertebrates. Next slide. So more on environmental education. Sometimes that little guy's being dressed up as a macroinvertebrate. And we have older students, high school students, doing field work. And then in the lower right, we have trout eggs. And you can just see the trout coming through. And those go into classrooms, and that's part of education lessons on how the trout grow, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they emerge, the students get to put them release them into the stream. Next slide. So again, more education, not only for children. Sometimes we take them on our pontoon boats so they can actually do hands-on water testing with Kemmerer bottles and that sort of thing. And then in the lower left, we have programs for adults on all sorts of things. That one was Doug Saigan from DES talking about invasive plants. And then on the right, there's a group, and those folks were visiting from Argentina. And we have connections with a global lake, GLEON, Global Lake Observatory Environmental Network. And it's a global lake collaboration. And they were visiting us here in Sunapee. Next slide. We also have an invasive species program. I don't know if you're aware, but everywhere, just about, there are aquatic invasive species. Great Lakes is a good example. Also Lake Champlain in Vermont. Well, if you have invasive milfoil and hydrilla and some other plants, or Asian clams, zebra mussels, they can make a real mess of a water body. So we have a very aggressive program. We have Lake Coast, who greet boaters, look at their boat to see if they have any plants or nasties hanging off the hull of the motor. And each year, well, we have one or two what we call saves. So those are invasives that did not make it into the lake. In the lower left, those are DES folks looking for Asian clams. And in the lower right is our volunteer. He's a board member and he's also a diver, and he volunteers to get a really close look on invasives. Next slide. So this is just I have newer slides on this one, but the point is that if you look at Massachusetts and you look at the state of New York, they have a lot of ponds and lakes and rivers that have invasives. So the name of the game is for us anyway, is to try to keep them away from our Lake Sunapee and our local lakes. It's a problem because a lot of people don't realize that they are boaters, the fishermen, that they are the major vectors for these invasives. Next slide. So we also do plankton tows for cyanobacteria. It's not a big big problem right now in Lake Sunapee, but cyanobacteria, the green scum, Lake Erie was in the news recently, and so it is a problem. And so and I can talk about how we're battling it, but what we're doing is measuring just what is the situation of cyanobacteria, and ours is called Gliotrichia enchilada. And so how much of it is there, what months does it show up, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're trying to find out. Next slide. So once you take the tow, then you come back and look at the sample under a microscope and actually count the number of cells that you have. Next slide. We also look at the sediment because the chemistry of the lake sediment has a lot to do with whether your lake is, we'll say, friendly or not, chemistry-wise to cyanobacteria. So we do that as well. Next slide. And this is a winter sediment coring. That tells us a lot. That's been analyzed for cyanobacteria back to about the 1800s. And it's not new. Cyanobacteria has been with us for longer than that probably, but we have proof that it's not new in Lake Sunapee. It's been with us for a while, which is really interesting. But at this point, why has it begun to emerge? What's different in the water or in the chemistry? Next slide. And another way of analyzing sediment, particularly around here where our lake, they call it a glacial lake, which is true, but its formation goes way further back in terms of the geology. We're known as the granite state. So there, again, it's chemistry and geology. So we had the opportunity to have someone from the Cold Regions Lab up in Hanover to help us out. So they brought their ground penetrating radar in order to analyze the benthic or the lower sediment. Next slide. No, I didn't know if I left this in. This is kind of, but anyway, what it does is show you where you have to be an expert to read it, really. But you know, you do a transact across the lake or across land, but in this case, we were interested in the sediment under the water, and you can see if you know what you're looking at, like an ancient channel. You can see bedrock, you can see till, you can see different structures of the sediment. So, you know, in the future, as we do more sediment studies, we'll know where to pick to take our samples. Next slide. Yes, watershed, land use, and the water connections. This is a shot of, on someone's lake property, a stream that was polluted by some development across the road. And you can see it's just awful. It's raining and it's muddy, and there's a lot of sediment being run into the lake. Next slide. So we're very interested in that watershed land use. And this is a recent slide really from a student who worked with us when she was an undergrad, and she's now a PhD candidate. And she from Virginia Tech, it's not Vermont, it's Virginia Tech. And so she's looking at land use, climate, how they're affecting water quality in an oligotrophic lake, which is what Sunapee is. It's still clear. It's considered oligotrophic, although it's inching up to mesotrophic. And so that's a study that's in process now. Next slide. So as part of that, we have been taking data since the 1980s, which makes us, Lake Sunapee, very attractive for researchers because we have that long-term data as a foundation for their research. And so on the left, you have people taking samples. You have our Gleon instrumented buoy. And then she's taking that information, and then there's a lake ecosystem model that's been developed. So the input to the model is this kind of data that I've been talking about. And the output is a prediction on cyanobacteria, on the trophic status of the lake, hopefully. That's what she's working on. Next slide. So that gives you a sense for the breadth, I suppose, of what LSPA dabbles in. I wanted to just give samples of environmental career pathways. So this is my staff. Jeff started off in the environmental business sector. He worked for an environmental company before coming to LSPA. Susie is actually a birder, and so she worked with Audubon, and she worked with analyzing just bird populations in the Isle of Shoals. And then she did get, at some point along there, a master's in environmental studies at Antioch. And then she worked for the Loon Preservation Committee in New Hampshire, and then came to LSPA. Kathleen has been in education since day one. She started off at an environmental camp, and then actually she's been with the LSPA for 25 years. So environmental education all the way. Nancy was in public education. She was a special needs educator. And then she also got a master's, I don't remember from where, and then came to environmental education at LSPA. I, as Noel already stated, I was in engineering design. I worked on the NASA, as an intern, I worked on the NASA ablative heat shield. So that was kind of fun. And then I did design a variety of cameras, and then at Abbott for devices for people with diabetes. Anyway, and then I was in management in the business sector. And then I came to LSPA first as a volunteer and then as a board member. I was chair of the first watershed committee, and now I'm director. And Terrico, who I'm sure you all know, started in actually at LSPA, the early lab, which was at the Sunapee High School. And then she taught math at public school for quite a few years. And then now she's a joint lab manager. So you can see where people's backgrounds kind of zigzag. And today you can never guess where you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years. I mean, it's really interesting to see the paths that people take. Another point here is that the environmental sector has so many possibilities. So there's for-profit, and there are many for-profit environmental companies in New Hampshire. A lot of them are listed on the New Hampshire DES website because, for example, when we have a grant and we look for an organization or a business to do the work, they have to be accredited by New Hampshire DES. So they have, I think, about 30 companies listed there. So that's something to keep in mind. And I just put GZA, Geo Environmental, there because we've dealt with them before and it's a fine organization. So for-profit, not-for-profit, and another example of that is, any lake association or a watershed association or a land trust. For example, Osborne Sargent Land Trust is the local example of that. When they want to conserve a piece of land, there are many choices. They have to rate them and they have to say, well, which one is deserving, what's our best bang for the buck, so to speak. So that's another one. Field work, Hubbard Brook Research Foundation up in just south of the Whites. They're famous because I can't think of his name, but their early research was if you cut a forest, how does it affect the ecosystem? We think we know pretty well now. We take it for granted, but back in around the 1970s, 1960s, they really didn't. So that first early research was done at Hubbard Brook. And they still, to this day, take measurements in their various forest segments. So they're world renowned, actually. And then there's modeling, GIS, if you're more on the techie side. Lots going on there, my goodness. And then, of course, research or management. And so it just, there are so many possibilities. Next, I think I have one more slide. So again, and that picture to the right there is from Hubbard Brook. There are so many aspects. There's research, understanding the fundamentals. There's technical, using the best tools or designing the tools, sensors, and so forth. Data management. Data management is not to be scoffed at because you have raw data, but then there's a whole process from raw data that's scrubbed, let's say, to useful data. There's sociology. There's actually one project that we're involved in that's coupled human natural relationships or something like that. But the point being that it's nature and humans. So why do humans behave the way they do, even though it might be detrimental to their own well-being, to their water quality? Why is that? And it's interesting, just recently there was a survey on a project locally, and they asked people how they felt about buffers, and they would show them that, if you have a natural 250 feet or 100 feet from the water's edge, you're going to have blue water and very little cyanobacteria. If you're going to put fertilizer on your lawn right down to the edge, your lake's going to start turning green, in simple terms. So how do you feel about a buffer? Okay, buffer sounds good. So would you be willing, if you don't have a buffer, to put in a buffer? And go, I don't know. So sociology and psychology, what is this human natural relationship? Public policy is another area. There's a lot to do there, whether it's local, state, or national. And communication. We find that graphic and visual arts come into it, pictures. People love pictures. These days, there's so much media hammering people, if you will, that, a picture is worth 1,000 words kind of thing, that's huge. So, for example, in environmental studies with a sense for graphic art, that's a great combination. And then, of course, writing. There's a gap between the scientists, usually, and we'll say the public. So translating the environmental work and results of research in a way that's easy for the public to understand, because a knowledgeable public then can have a voice that's well-informed, either locally or when they vote statewide or nationally and so forth. So there are all these elements, that are part of the environmental field. And I think that's it for the slideshow. Oh no, one more. Yeah, this is great. This was, we just finished a watershed plan. And this visual, because people were having trouble, we would say, this pond over here, Morgan Pond, and this stream and so forth. Whereas this was kind of like a plumbing diagram for Lake Sunapee. And you can quickly look at it and say, oh my goodness, there's so much more phosphorus coming from Water Pond and Baptist Pond and from Chalk Pond, or, so on and so forth. People really, general public, really like this slide. So that's an example of taking something complicated in words and making it easily understood. I think that's last slide. Oh.
Okay, let me just stop the share. It looks like we got a few more people. I'd love to open this up to students now. I don't want to rush you, but if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions for June as related to, what she spoke of, or, how maybe your background might relate to what, what you could do in the environmental sector.
So how many of you are seniors?
Raise hand. No.
Nobody. Okay, juniors.
There we go.
Junior. Okay. So you're beginning to think about something other than finals and, what to do next. And the rest, I take it, are sophomores or so. Well,
Well, I have a question just to kind of maybe get things going, and maybe,
sure.
and then students can jump in at any point. So when you were talking about profit versus nonprofit,
Mhm.
and what would, like, I'm trying to think about what would make a company be one or the other. I mean, obviously to make money, right? But
Well,
I mean,
yes.
beyond that.
Yes, I mean, usually there aren't companies that are not for profit. Usually that's an association.
Mhm.
It could, yeah, I mean, it could be, a lake association, a land trust, two examples I gave. Or if I think about Gleon, that's nonprofit. If I think about Hubbard Brook, that's nonprofit. So, but companies themselves, as we think of them, are usually for profit. There's a special kind of for profit that it's for profit, but it also how should I put it, with a conscience. Not that the others don't have,
Mhm.
but it's not for profit to the max. It has a mission as well.
All right.
But most companies are for profit, and
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with that, really.
Right.
And frankly, usually they have more resources. Not that the nonprofits don't,
Mhm.
but it's something to think about.
Would a nonprofit be more education focused and maybe for-profit be more research based? Does that hold any water?
No, I think nonprofits are research-based or educational. Um, and for-profits, will have a job to do. Um, so if we hire somebody to do a, complicated stormwater installation, let's say, that's their job, and that's what they're going to do, which is fine. We need those. Yeah. So that's kind of the difference. Either way, it's all experience, and experience. You just want to make sure that you get paid fairly.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't see a problem with either one.
Okay. Does anybody want to jump in? I don't want to be a question hog here. Anyone? Okay. So I'm wondering, June, what is the biggest challenge in the industry at the moment in terms of I don't know, funding or filling jobs, or challenges within the environment? Like what is, or it could be COVID itself, but
Well, COVID's as you all know, COVID's a real stinker. Yeah, we can't go into classrooms today. That's
mhm.
usually Gleon has a global meeting, and we hosted it one year, and it was fun meeting people. It was more than fun. I mean, it was informative meeting people from all over the world and comparing lake problems. I remember a guy from China, well, researcher from China, showed Lake Tahoe. Now that was the lake that a few years ago was featured in the Olympics because it was so thick with green they couldn't do the sailing regatta, for the Summer Olympics. Anyway, so he gets up there and he shows his slides, and the gasp from from our local area, people, from Newland and Newbury and so forth. I mean, it was, so we think we have water problems. The rest of the world is really, has even worse in some cases. Anyway, so yeah, COVID's a real problem. But getting back to environmental problems, I think the challenges are two. Well, there's lots, but one of them is getting people to really understand that their little bit, when you add it up to, 300 million people in the United States doing the same little negative bit, that yes, you have an influence on the environment. So getting people to understand that their little bit makes a difference, that's a challenge. Because people like what they like, and it's hard to change patterns. I think we're making inroads locally, because even for Lake Sunapee, if I can't get them with the environmental argument, I'll get them with the tax argument. That in your town, most of the taxes are coming from the clean lake in a way,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, but the other one is state and particularly national, which just this morning, I sit on the State Invasives Committee. Anyway, when you look at the EPA lately, EPA, there are some great people that we've worked with in the EPA. They're dedicated, they're environmentalists, and it's great. But when you get politics mixed in, sometimes the result is not so great. So, for example, Roundup or glyphosate, it causes cancer. But recently, the EPA reversed its decision about having Midwest farmers be able to use it. And so they can use it now on soy and corn, primarily in the Midwest. And I understand there's a whole thing there about agriculture and how it's run, and they have to make money, and that's a whole semester worth. But so I'm like, okay, I'm not buying any soy anymore, that kind of thing. Well, just this morning, I was at a meeting of the Invasives Committee, and we were listening to the local or the state agriculture person talk about herbicides being used in the lakes in New Hampshire when invasive plants get out of hand. I mean, they've lost the ball game. They didn't catch it early, so now you can't even swim in the water. Milfoil and some of the others, it's dangerous because you can get tangled up. So what to do? And they have different ways of treating it, but one way is with herbicides. And guess what's now on the list again? Roundup. And so that's kind of a big problem when state governments or even local governments, but whatever level, when they really don't put the best policy forward for the environment or for people's health.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't take too much to come into that. That's a big problem. So there's two.
Yeah. So a couple of things spoke to me just now where you were like, well, if we can get everybody to do a little bit, it's kind of like vote. Your vote counts, if we can one vote, but it counts. But if we can get everybody to do a little bit for the environment, that would be like the best kind of scenario.
Yes.
So I'm gonna give the students a chance. I don't want to I always want to do that, but that's okay, because if you don't mind, June, I'd like to shift over to sort of like your earlier career and sort of your track in terms of that, and just some questions about like who your influences were. So kind of who were your mentors, and who sort of, well, names are not going to mean anything, but
Yeah,
who,
yeah,
like
yeah, I
who in
know.
terms of like helped you along your path, and who mentored you, and who stands out in your memory in terms of like that really helped you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, from an environmental standpoint, um, I guess there are a couple. I mean, early on, um, I'm 73. So in high school in the 60s, um, girls just didn't do engineering. They didn't do math. They weren't, so, but I had a couple of teachers who said, go for it. So I did. Um, so that, you know, every once in a while you do, even though that wasn't an environmental um, thing, every once in a while you have that teacher, you have that parent or someone who says, yeah, go for it. um, but fast forwarding, yeah, there still is a gentleman who was a former director at LSBA who said, because I told you I was a volunteer and on the board, and this position came open, and he said, yeah, you ought to think about it.
Mhm.
I said, really? And so those little things that mean a lot and kind of influence you a little bit.
Yeah, and encouraged, it sounds like, for sure,
Yes,
and kind of looked up to as role models.
yes.
Um, so going back to your earlier career also,
Oh, yeah.
what are some rookie mistakes that you made in the beginning that you would
Oh,
you see others making now and wish that hadn't back then too? Like,
yeah.
wish you'd done differently.
Gee, I don't know that I would have done much differently. Um, what I did do correctly, I think, was just, if let's say you get a job and it just doesn't feel right. Well, look for another one. You know, you don't have to stay stuck at all.
Mhm.
Um, and when I first graduated, I had what a lot of people would have considered a very nice job. But to me, it was boring. So I changed. So I think, follow your gut. I mean, don't do stupid things, but, you know,
Yeah.
that, the saying, don't let go of one vine, the monkey rule, don't let go of one vine until you've got the other one. But other than that, I mean, just kind of, know what you want and go for it.
So in terms of the LSPA's had several, has a close connection with college, and has
Yes.
several interns from the college. What has stood out as like for students seeking internships and jobs within this industry? What in your mind stands out as a quality or or a trait or something that to you, you look at that resume and say, wow, this would be a really good candidate for this
Yeah.
position?
Yeah. Well, it's always hard to evaluate people just on their resumes, frankly. I've hired a lot of people in my career, and it's much better meeting with them, even on Zoom, but I would say, enthusiasm, going for the gold ring, so to speak, um, and and just being motivated. That motivation, if you don't know something, that motivation will take you to, well, I don't know that, so I'm going to find out. Just So I would say enthusiasm
Okay.
and, a can-do attitude
Oh, great.
comes to my mind, yes.
Any sort of field work that would look particularly good on a resume necessarily?
I think all field work looks good, really, getting out there is good. Lab experience,
Yeah.
of course, is good. Getting your hands dirty, as it were, for the most part, is good. Now, does that really make a difference if you're modeling, or doing GIS? I probably still would, because then you'd have that experience to round out your talent. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna ask one last question to kind of round things out here. And just sort of off the top of your head, what is like the overall best piece of advice you'd give students at this point right now?
Oh gosh.
COVID, taking into account the future, like what is the last piece to leave the students with?
I think it's have a goal, know what you like, know what you don't like, and just get out there, be enthusiastic. If you're not sure what you want to do, well, just pick something and run with it for a while. You don't want to stay stagnant and say, gosh, I just don't know. And the next day, gosh, I just don't know. You want to run with something, just get out there.
Experiment and try new things.
Experiment and do and be, and yes. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much, June. I so appreciate this.
You're welcome. And if anyone wants to, you have my email. If anyone has questions or follow up.
Do you want to put your email in the chat, June? Would you mind doing that?
Oh, sure.
And then this is actually being recorded, so anybody who looks at it later will also have it. So,
okay.
Yeah, reach out, because the LSPA is a great internship resource for us. And if you're into the bio environmental science fields, and I know most of you do know Terrico, and she's a great contact as well. So
she is.
And, obviously they do amazing work. So, I mean, and it's local, it's right here. And I really like the whole idea behind doing, everybody did that one little bit, we can make a difference. So, great.
I'm trying to.
Thank you, Hillary.
Did that go through?
I did not, I don't see it. I just see Hillary's.
Yeah, me too.
Let me, I'll put it in there.
All right.
Email and stick it in there.
Oh, wait a minute.
Did you get it?
Oh, hold on. Yes, there it is.
Okay, perfect. Excellent. Okay, so yeah, if anybody has any thoughts, follow-ups, questions, wants to reach out to June, please do. That's what we are all here for, as a resource for students. And I really appreciate all the students coming out. It was great seeing everybody, and even the people hidden in the squares. It's okay. Glad to have you here anyway.
I should say, Terrico starts looking for interns January, February. You can ask her if you're interested. No guarantees, but.
Yep, because bio majors do their internship, I believe, in the spring. So, right? Nod if I'm right. I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. Okay, Cameron says yes. So great. Well, great. Thank you again, June, so much for being here.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And it was wonderful.
Good luck to you all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Especially with COVID.
Everybody have a wonderful evening. Bye.